Hi, everyone. This is Chapter 10, Respiratory System. So this is where we're going to learn about how we breathe and get oxygen and CO2 to our cells. So the first section looks at the parts of the respiratory system. So this includes our lungs and then all the tubes that get air in and out of our lungs, basically. So our air can go in through our nose or mouth. If it goes in through the mouth, well, both, it'll dump into the pharynx, which is just kind of the bucket in the back of our mouth that opens up between our nose and mouth. And then it'll go into the larynx and into the trachea. And if we're eating, then our food goes down the esophagus. But if we're breathing, it goes down the larynx into the trachea. And we have this epiglottis little flap that closes up the larynx and the trachea to keep food from going down so that it goes down the esophagus. So then you have the trachea. It's also called the windpipe. You can feel it right here if you just kind of touch the front of your neck. Your esophagus is behind it, so you can't feel that. But your trachea kind of feels like it has little ribs, little kind of striations on it, and it's hard. And then if you're male, you can really feel your vocal cords and your Adam's apple more prominently. Right where the larynx is where your Adam's apple is. So here's a diagram that shows these parts, and what you're feeling there are the little ribs of your trachea, and those are hard. It's made out of cartilage, but those are hard, rigid rings that keep your trachea open so it doesn't collapse. And then here you can see your nose and mouth, that they dump back into the same little pocket, which is your pharynx. And then your epiglottis is that tissue that flaps over the trachea to allow food to go down to the esophagus, which is behind. So your trachea leads to your lungs. It branches off into two bronchi and then into little bronchioles. And then eventually it terminates kind of in the alveoli of the lungs, which are like these little berry clusters that are covered with capillaries. And that's where gas exchange is happening. And then you have this diaphragm here. That's the muscle that causes hiccups, but it's also the muscle that makes you breathe. Your lungs are just flaps of tissue. They don't really do anything. They're just laying there. And your diaphragm is contracting and pushing air in and out of your lungs, along with your intercostal muscles, which are the muscles between your ribs. So the lungs, you've got two of them. They're kind of nestled on each side of your heart. And they're soft, spongy, elastic. If you've ever hunted and gutted a deer or something, you can feel how thin and fluffy they are. And that's where gas exchange happens. If you've gutted anything, you might be able to feel the bronchioles and bronchi and trachea too. This is showing you the lining of the respiratory tract. It has these little hairs, and these special cells make mucus, so they catch any dust or foreign particles that don't need to be there. And then this picture is showing your vocal cords. These are the cords that that make sound. And if you're making a low sound, they kind of get shorter. And if you're making a high sound, they get longer. And then they vibrate, and that's what's making the sound coming out of my mouth or my throat right now. And then I changed the position of my mouth and tongue to make words. So we're able to change the pitch of the sound and the amplitude of the sound with these vocal cords. And there's some videos on YouTube that you can watch that shows that. But there you can see, kind of looking down from the tongue, what that looks like. So respiration means exchanging gases in your cells. We exchange gases, in the lungs, and then the blood that becomes oxygenated, and it carries it all over our body. But we're focusing on what happens in the lungs. We use the oxygen that our lungs grab. They are given to the red blood cells, and then the red blood cells give that oxygen to our cells. Our mitochondria use them all over our body. And then CO2 is produced, and then that is brought back to the lungs after it passes through the heart through deoxygenated blood, and then that's sent out of the body. This works because we currently, like on Earth, we're actually under a lot of pressure. We're at about 15 psi, if you know what that means in terms of tire pressure. So that's how much the atmosphere is pushing down on us. And we require that and able to be able to breathe. So that pressure allows us to maintain gas exchange. So some factors that influence gas exchange, our alveoli in our lungs, which are the little berry things that I showed you before, those have tremendous surface area because they have, let me just show you here. Each little alveoli has like a little wall here. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. So you can see the little wall pocket on the sectioned alveoli. And so all of that is surface area that's just coated with all these capillaries, and you have millions of these alveoli. And so those are the ones that are actually providing the surface area to allow you to exchange gases. And then you also have to maintain a pressure gradient in order for diffusion to happen. That's where the atmospheric pressure comes in. And then as the air is going in and out of the alveoli, it's exchanging. We have blood in the capillaries, and that's the oxygen is going from the alveoli sac to the hemoglobin, to the blood. So what do we have here? I think this is kind of showing how it moves in and out from other cells. But it's just going to diffuse in from high to low, like oxygen and CO2 exchange is passive, and it's just going to go from high to low. So your cells, if they have high CO2, it's just going to diffuse out. If they have low O2, it's going to diffuse right in. And here's a look at the, I think it's showing the blood vessels and the, like the trachea and the bronchi and how interwoven they are. So it's showing you all these little passages that lead to alveoli and how the blood vessels follow. So that's pretty cool. When you're at a higher altitude, there's going to be less oxygen available, so it's going to be harder to breathe, and you can run out of oxygen. Some people train, like athletes train in high altitudes where there's less oxygen. When you dive, there's more pressure. That's going to cause more nitrogen gas to build up in your tissue. It can cause some weird symptoms. And then when you come back up, you get what you call the bends if you ascend too quickly, because some nitrogen bubbles will form in your tissues. Okay, so when you breathe in and out, I want you to try this as we're like going through this because it seems kind of backwards. When you breathe in, your lungs fill up with air. That is because your intercostal muscles are, I think they're relaxing, does it say? They're moving out anyway. And your diaphragm is moving down. So I want you to try that. Breathe in really deeply and see if you can feel your ribs move out, and maybe you can feel as your diaphragm moves down. And then when you breathe out, your ribs are gonna relax and your diaphragm's gonna move down or move up to push the air out, I mean. So that the muscles are the ones doing the work. Your lungs are just sitting there filling up with air when they're told and expressing air when they're told. But your muscles are the ones doing the work. You take in about 500 mils of air, but your lungs always have some residual volume that stays in there. So one thing that you can try is you can breathe in really deeply, and then you can breathe out, and then try to breathe out some more. Try to get even more air out. You'll feel that it feels kind of weird, but you don't normally breathe out that much air, but you do have some residual air in there that just stays in your lungs. There's even more than what you can breathe out. So right here's the residual volume that just stays in your lungs. If food goes into the trachea, like we said, and the epiglottis doesn't block it, you can choke because you do not want anything but air going down into your lungs. People can suffocate quickly, and they're not getting any air. If that trachea is blocked, you're not getting any air. So then that's when you do the Heimlich maneuver, which is shown there, and it's different in babies. So if you are a caretaker of an infant, you should research how to take care of them and how to do the Heimlich differently. And you can take first aid on that too. Okay, so you have two different types of respiration when we use that word respiration. There's also cellular respiration, which is a different term that we looked at in chapter 2, I think. But this is actual respiration, which has to do with breathing. Cell respiration doesn't. So there's internal and external. I'm going to start with external. External is just exchanging gases in your alveoli, in your lungs. So that is external. So you can write that down. External is what's happening in the alveoli. Internal is what's happening in your body tissues, where the blood is bringing the oxygen all over your body, and then it's going to exchange gases. So then it's going to exchange it for CO2, and then that's going to come back out to the lungs. So that's the internal and external type of respiration. So hemoglobin is the type of cell or protein that's in red blood cells that carries the oxygen. When it is oxygenated, it's called oxyhemoglobin, and the pH is going to change, and acidity plays a role. Here's your alveoli. These are millions of them. They're microscopic. They're in your lungs, and you can see they have like little pockets, little berries. They're covered with capillaries, and that is where gas exchange happens. So this interface between this air sac and the capillaries, that's where the gas is exchanging freely. It's just diffusing. The red blood cells do not come into your lungs. There's no blood going into your alveoli. It's just staying right on the outside, and then it's just passing the ball. It's just passing CO2 and oxygen. So when you breathe in, when you inspire, these alveoli are going to have more oxygen compared to the blood near it. And so that oxygen is going to flow into the blood. So this picture's backwards. And then the CO2, your red blood cells, they're spent, they're used. So they're going to have more CO2, and that's going to move back into the alveoli, and that's going to be breathed out. So that's how the process works. So hemoglobin and blood plasma also carry carbon dioxide also. It dissolves in the plasma too. When CO2, that waste, is bound, it's called carbaminohemoglobin. There's a reaction that can happen with baking soda, basically, that can also occur. So that's what we're breathing out. This graphic shows some different pressures, partial pressures of CO2 and O2. So when the pressure of one's higher, it's going to diffuse out in that direction. Okay, our brain is in charge of making us breathe. So we have this little spot in our brainstem in the medulla, and that's sometimes not very well developed in babies, which might explain why there's a disease or a disorder called SIDS and infant death syndrome. So the brainstem is what's telling our diaphragm to move. So it sends signals to the diaphragm and the rib cage. And it's actually a timing thing. It's not primarily triggered by carbon dioxide. It's actually a timing where this nerve is like, gosh, it's been a while since we've breathed. We probably should contract the diaphragm. Carbon monoxide and blood pH also play a role. So there it is in the brainstem in your medulla. And then that triggers your intercostal muscles and your diaphragm to contract. And that's going to bring air in. Other controls help match airflow to blood flow. So if we are like running a lot, we need to breathe faster, that kind of thing. When we're breathing, we aren't swallowing. So if you try swallowing and breathing at the same time, like swallowing a drink of water and breathing, that's not going to happen. And if you try to hold your breath, that's when you pass out, right? Because your body's like reset and makes you breathe. Okay, so this is showing chemoreceptors are detecting your pH and then determining when you need to breathe. But the primary thing is timing, which is interesting. There's a few things that can affect your respiratory system. Of course, smoke cigarettes, and vapes are cancer sticks. We don't have a lot of data on vapes yet, but we do know that many people have had to have a double lung transplant because of vaping. Even some of them only vaped like less than a year. And so they have also done research on cells, like it's called in vitro, where they grow the cells in like a petri dish and they look at the effect of vape product on them. So e-cigarettes, also dangerous, more addictive than regular cigarettes. Please don't do that. And if you need help quitting, there's resources available. And you can ask me too. I can try to hook you up if you need help quitting. Please quit if you are, and never start if you're not. Bronchitis can be caused by allergens and chemical agents. Here is a little graphic that shows you the effects of smoking, and in 10 years, we're going to see a similar graphic of vaping, but I think it's going to be much worse. 10 years isn't very long. It took a lot longer for us to find out that cigarettes are cancer sticks. Emphysema is another disorder that can be caused from smoking or disease, and those little alveoli get like stretched out, and the surface area becomes less, and they're not as flexible, so you can't breathe as well. Your lung capacity goes down. And then chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder is also another one that can lead from emphysema. And then asthma can be caused by several things. Sleep apnea, we are learning more about it now. Some people have to wear CPAP machines, and it can be deadly. So you need to get checked out if you think that you have sleep apnea. Okay, and then some diseases, some pathogens. Pneumonia is probably the most significant disease caused in the lungs it can be bacteria or viral. So influenza or streptococcus pneumonia, and it causes your lungs to fill up with fluid and get inflamed. And then the H1N1 virus, and then of course COVID, that's a lung disease too. Tuberculosis is spiking right now. If you are not vaccinated, think about that. This is if you've watched those Western movies where the guys would cough up blood, that's tuberculosis. It's deadly. It's awful. And nowadays, it's a bacteria. Nowadays, the bacteria is resistant to a lot of antibiotics often. So it's pretty nasty now, a lot more so than what was it, Tombstone, coughing up blood. And then lung cancer, of course, which we talked about. The most common that we know of cause of lung cancer is cigarettes. And soon it's going to be e-cigarettes too. So take care of your lungs, and I hope you enjoyed learning about them.